I know that there are arguments, as presented here this evening, that justice and compassion guided by Christian teachings would entail some level of non-enforcement of immigration law or easing up of current immigration law. But I guess I would just make the challenge to consider and ponder the possible unintended consequences of those policies, and what you may advocate may seem more just and compassionate, but may ultimately lead to injustice and lack of compassion for both U.S. citizens and non-U.S. citizens. And that's why I would be reluctant to advocate a comprehensive solution to immigration. Likely the solutions are going to be much more incremental across the board.
I think as a Christian, not to raise a voice against what is obviously a racial profiling, voter repression law would be, as a Christian, taking a step backward, much like in the 1950s, not speaking out against segregation. Fortunately, there's too long a history of abuse directed toward primarily people of color and primarily Latinos in Arizona. And not to voice that concern, I think would be a disservice, especially as a Christian.
My understanding from most advocates of immigration controls from groups like, say, Numbers USA is they do not think it's in any way viable or realistic that you're going to deport 11 million people. It's more a process of a gradual attrition over the years, and if you do have serious immigration law enforcement, then perhaps potentially you could have a legalization process, but let's do the security first. We'll talk about the legalization path later.
Much like our drug problem, if you stop the demand, then the bigger issue will always be undermined by it.
We have focused very much on enforcement. Like I said, we've quadrupling spending over the last decade. And so why don't we fix the legal system so that it makes sense, so that people can enter legally in a timely and efficient process. And if people are working and they're abiding by the law and they have family members who are here and they're part of the fabric of our community and they're contributing to our economies, then why wouldn't we provide them at least a process by which they can earn their legal status?
The legalization process now is somewhat disingenuous, and you just end up with the same cycle repeating itself over the years and over the decades. And I think that concern is somewhat legitimate in that many of those who are most prominent in making these arguments for comprehensive immigration reform, in effect, if you ask them if they favor any realistic control on immigration to the country, the answer comes back as not really. It's almost an automatic right should be granted to anyone who can make it to our borders.
I don't think that's true.
No?
There absolutely should be a cap, and absolutely.
But what is that?
Well,
what's your ideal cap?
most economists will say that over the next 20 years, we actually have to double immigration to sustain our population. We would say, as Church World Service, and in looking through the policy, that right now we have about 1 million immigrants coming legally, and that could be increased to 1.25, 1.5 million, which would meet the demand for people who are coming illegally. And so if you meet the demand of people who desperately want to enter for jobs or for family unity, then you reduce undocumented immigration, you have people coming through the legal system, and that way everyone's happy.
George W. Bush understood this issue better than any American president has probably in the last 40 years. He definitely understood that there had to be multiple layers to this. He also understood that the Republican Party, if they did not develop some kind of comprehensive plan, were going to alienate the Latino vote, which the Latino vote is going to be the difference maker in 20 to 25 years. And then he knew that if the Republican Party didn't take that lead, that it was going to dramatically affect their larger electoral policy.
I think that it'll be really interesting to see the dynamic between the Senate, which could still be very pro-immigrant, the DREAM Act could, for instance, move, and the House, where we're likely to see more border enforcement, solely border enforcement heavy legislation.
I think that there's two phases that we look at between now and December during the lame duck session. I think that's certainly a time frame where some kind of immigration reform could pass. And I think some of those Democrats that are going out, they won't have anything to lose to do something on this. And some of those that are Republicans that are retiring, the exact same thing. They wouldn't have anything to lose or going out. And then I think that for somebody like Senator Lindsey Graham, who could bring together other Republicans, he was in favor of it. He backed away because he felt that the Democratic Party was using it for political means for the upcoming election, so backed away from it. I think he can come back on the table.
I think people have seen the impact of family separation and raids and are meeting the prophetic call to do something about it.
Border Patrol is really focused right on the border. This is 50 to 75 to 100 miles inland. So there are significant challenges with that. And we run the risk, I think, and I think the issue has been, security is one thing, but how far do we go? To the point where we're endangering our own civil liberties, our own civil rights.
I think one thing that is missing in terms of we think it should be more prominent in all of those proposals are the enforcement of current labor laws, because in many situations, in fact in most situations where a large population of undocumented immigrants are being employed, labor rights are being violated. People are being paid under the table, less than minimum wage. People have to work long hours. Women in particular are exploited by their employers, and they fear reporting that because of their status. And so that's also one way, is encouraging and supporting the Department of Labor to enforce labor standards, as well as having something like an employment verification system.
A friend of mine was working at a hotel in HR. They were told they were about to be raided, and they were. They took out 50 workers. They raided 5 other hotels that same day. So what the HR managers got together to do was to call the other hotel and tell them to send their workers that had just been kicked out. And so they just sort of played a little circular thing with it. Law enforcement can't do anything because these people are driven so far underground that these workers, and what ultimately brought it to the forefront is he refused to pay them the 2 weeks that they were owed. So finally somebody came out of the woodwork. But of course they did so under the threat of deportation.
We have family backlogs where people are waiting up to 7 years to be reunited with spouses and minor children. We have 24-year backlogs for people who are looking to be reunited with siblings. I mean, that incentivizes someone to come through an illegal treatment, right? So how can we fix our current system and the naturalization backlog so that people who are here, who are following the rules, can actually do so and that our system functions? We do see some competition, and I think the best thing we can do is create a process by which people who are undocumented can apply for legal status so that that playing field is level. People have to be paid the same amount, their workers' rights have to be protected at the same way so that there's not unfair wage competition.
This is not a call for amnesty for these people to be given automatic citizenship. It is a call for a guest worker program, much like what we've seen in the history with the Southwest Bracero program, where actually the workers' rights were protected by Mexico in terms of the defense of their own workers, and also the workers were actually required to send back money to Mexico to their families to guarantee that there was a flow going back and forth.
I don't think the institutional church, denominations, or ecumenical bodies should be legislatively advocating comprehensive immigration reform. I think the church, institutional church, should be advocating or fostering a discussion and pointing believers towards the broad principles that people on both sides of the debate ought to be employing in that process. We currently allow legally 1 million to come to our country every year. I believe that's the most generous policy of any country in the world. I think it's a policy that we can be very grateful for, and I don't think we have to approach it with an attitude of atonement and looking for forgiveness for it.
What incentive does someone have in Mexico, living under poverty and under oppression, under just deplorable situations, to try to go through the legal process, knowing that they're never going to get through the legal process because other people are backlogged there as well? We've got to reform the legal process, and when we do that, that helps to take off some of the pressure that we're seeing on the border. We've got to address the immigration, the trade issue, the economic issue, the enforcement with the employer issue. We can't just simply have at the border a no trespassing sign. At the same time, everyone is welcome sign. And that's what we have. We have conflicting messages at the border. We're saying you can't come in, but no, everybody come in and we're going to close our eyes. We're not going to enforce our laws. And then we're in this mess of just complete gridlock. And that's what we have to work through.